Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is episode number 202. I'm here with Philip Walters, middle school band director in Anchorage School District in Alaska. Philip, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
I,
Enjoying
I
my last little bit of summer.
That's awesome. I think the two of us could not get further apart in geographical location. I'm on the eastern coast of Maine, and you're in Alaska. You live in the Anchorage area, I assume.
Yeah, I live in Chugiak, which is about 20 minutes north of Anchorage.
So, as someone who grew up in Maryland, sort of what was your path towards landing here in Alaska and being a middle school band director there?
Yeah, I grew up in Maryland, lived in Maryland for my first 18 years. Then I went to the University of Georgia for the band program there, for the tuba teacher there, actually. I came up to Alaska on vacation with my brother in 2002 and just loved it. And so I started trying to figure out ways to get back. I started looking for like tourism jobs or whatever.
Hmm.
I was still in college at the time. So when I graduated from college, I knew I didn't want to go back to Maryland because Maryland's super crowded right outside the DC area. And Georgia was just way too hot. I love Georgia, but just I couldn't stay there because it was just too hot for me. So I went somewhere that wasn't hot or crowded, and I decided to end up in Alaska.
We will get right back to our content, but I wanted to thank you for being such an amazing band director, that you're taking your time and listening to a band director podcast. There's many options out there, and I appreciate you very much taking in this content. I hope that you understand that your students are very lucky to have you as their band director, that you're continuing to grow, and that they are going to benefit from your improved skills as a band director. You can share this episode with any band director friends or other music education friends who can learn from this content, because good pedagogy is good pedagogy. And if you could take a moment and go to thegrowingbanddirector.com, and you'll be able to sign up on our Patreon platform to give at least $5 or $3 a month. And it helps the content continue to be created for you to help our profession grow. Let's go back to our scheduled episode. So the question I have is, what was it that you loved about Alaska that made you want to go back?
The outdoors. I'm very much an outdoors person. I grew up camping every summer and hiking all the time, and Alaska is still very much an outdoor playground.
Love it. So, so we talk about being a teacher in Alaska. I mean, we all know where we're from and what that's like. The question I have for you is, you grew up in Maryland, went to school in Georgia. You spent a lot of time in the lower 48. How is Alaska like similar to that, and how is it different, both in what it's like to teach middle school band versus teaching somewhere else, or the culture, right? How are things different? How are they the same?
I would say that they're more similar than most people would expect. I mean, I teach middle school band. I've been teaching it I'm going into my 12th year of teaching middle school band now, I guess. And middle schoolers are middle schoolers no matter where they are.
Hmm.
They are weird, man. They are weird for all the best reasons. If you take a middle schooler from Georgia, you take a middle schooler from Maryland, you take a middle schooler from Anchorage, they're all gonna be saying stuff that you're like, what did you? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I mean, we're all trying to figure out what like Skibbity, Ohio is and all that at this point. Um, it's they're all middle schoolers are middle schoolers, and they're gonna be the same no matter where you are. Teaching them is pretty similar too. And the bands up here in Alaska are actually shockingly good. And I say that because I came from a lower 48 from Georgia. I mean, Georgia it is a kind of a band uh, a hub in the southeast, and the bands down there are fantastic. So I came up to Alaska not really expecting to hear great bands. I was like, that's Alaska. What can they have? But they have really fantastic programs in some cases up here because they've got some really good teachers up here. Just like anywhere, I mean, the teacher makes a big difference. I would say the differences that we have, there aren't nearly as many resources up here for especially private instruction. I am the low brass guy in our area. There might be one other person in the Anchorage area who teaches low brass lessons. Um, and I honestly stopped teaching lessons a couple years ago because my schedule got filled and I got tired of convincing students that they needed to practice. And it's really hard to find good private instruction up here. That's the biggest thing. Whereas where I grew up in Maryland, I was lived out in PG County, right outside of DC. All of my private instructors were in the military bands. I had the best instructors probably in the country, just at my fingertips. So I would say the biggest issue that we have up here is private instruction, the lack of it, and yeah, that's one thing I wish we had more of. We also don't have much in the way of performing ensembles up here. The best performing ensemble that we regularly have up here is the Anchorage Symphony Orchestra, and they're pretty good, but they don't hold a candle to any of the larger symphony orchestras in the lower 48. Not for lack of trying, but they just don't have we don't have the pull from. So that's those are some things I wish that we had that we just don't.
So you mentioned you've been teaching middle school band for 12 years. My wife's a middle school teacher, and she says one thing she loves about middle school, as someone who wanted to be a high school band director, was when she learned how excited middle school kids got when they learned something, that was something she loved about them. Also, not so small secret, she doesn't really like 15-year-old girls. So by the time they get to the end of eighth grade, she's like, you can move on and see someone else now. So what is it like about the middle school niche that you really like, that makes it so cool and special?
So, as somebody who taught high school for 8 years before I taught middle school, first of all, I swore I'd never teach middle school. Swore it. My dad was a middle school band and orchestra teacher for 30 years. And he would come home every day super frustrated with the kids, the things his kids were doing. And I was like, man, he must hate his job. And I realize now he loved his job, but he came home super frustrated. He had to vent it out, get it out of his system so that he could go back the next day refreshed. Because middle schoolers, like I said, they're they're just they're they're just weird, but they come by it honestly. They don't have any choice but to be a little bit on the strange side. Their brain is awash with hormones. Their bodies are changing. Um, they just they even your most put together middle schooler just doesn't have it all together. And so, but because of that, they're still elementary schoolers. In one aspect, they get really excited about things like your wife was saying. They get really excited when they finally get something, and they're still willing very much to listen. With high schoolers, you kind of have to prove to them that you know what you're talking about and that what you're telling them to do will work. With middle schoolers, they're more apt to just, hey, let's try this thing, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, okay.
Mm.
So yeah, middle schoolers come by everything they do honestly. There's no pretense there.
Sponsorship for today's podcast is provided in part by Austin Custom Brass. Austin Custom Brass is the largest Adams brass dealer in the United States. Adams Brass makes some of the world's finest trumpets, flugelhorns, trombones, euphoniums, and tubas. Find out why some of the most renowned musicians in the world play Adams Brass, like many of the brass musicians from the Rotterdam Philharmonic Orchestra. Trent Austin, founder of Austin Custom Brass, is also an Adams artist. You can call Austin Custom Brass today at 816-410-0826 to learn more about Adams Brass, or visit their website at www.austincustombrass.biz. Austin Custom Brass is located in Kansas City, Missouri. You can visit their shop to try Adams Brass instruments and many other brands of instruments, or you can call them online, have stuff shipped to you. They work with an entire band program. You can do bids in the PO process and fit within your budget and all that. They are an amazing resource for brass players. Check them out. While we're on the topic of teaching middle school band, if you were to be able to speak to less experienced middle school band directors, or maybe a band director who's about to enter going into middle school, what are some things you might give them as tips of things you found that help you be successful?
So the biggest thing I would say is talk less and play more. I mean, middle schoolers, well, band students in general, they don't want to hear you talk. They're there to play. That's all they want to do. There was a professional development that I was in a couple years ago that um, it was kind of a ridiculous situation. The clinician came in and he was kind of rabid about find your two. What's your two? And what he meant was you can say two words that need to fix everything that you want fixed, and then you got to start playing again. If you say more than two words, you're going to lose them. So we would rehearse the ensemble, and he was literally right behind your head saying, "Find your two. What's your two?" And it was a little bit it was a lot intimidating.
Mm.
The point was made. If you can't say it in a sentence or maybe two sentences, 10 seconds maximum, then it's not important enough to really address at that point. Just play some more and then figure out what you're going to do next. So
Uh,
that's the biggest thing.
Has anybody ever left rehearsal saying, I really wish that teacher had talked more? I really wish they
Right.
had just talked more. I have a friend, Phil Edelman, who's a university professor, and he's taught every level of band here in Maine and around the country. And he has one of his percussionists in charge of the clock. So when he starts to speak, I think he said 12 seconds or 15 or something, and then he'll see the drumstick go up in the back. And when that drumstick goes up, that means, okay, I need to stop talking and move on. What are some other things you would tell young band directors as they kind of head into the middle school world?
There's so there's kind of pressure on new directors to come up with rules that they want to have in their classroom to make sure that their classroom's their own. The one thing I would say is don't make a rule that you're not willing to enforce. I've watched student teachers, I've watched new teachers come in and say, okay, well, we're not going to do this in my classroom, and then I watch like 10 kids during that rehearsal do that exact thing. The teacher sees them do it, and they don't do anything about it. Well, if you're going to make a rule that you're not willing to enforce, that's just a suggestion. It's not a rule, and that's fine. But don't call it a rule,
Mm-hmm.
um, because the students will are definitely paying attention to what they can get away with, and not because they're bad kids. They just want to know where their limitations are.
I've heard the same thing about consequences. There's stories you can tell about this, but like telling them the consequence before they've committed the crime. Sometimes they'll say, "Hey, that's worth that consequence." So I was taught a long time
Exactly.
ago, don't give a consequence, and then whenever it happens, then you can do something you think is appropriate for that situation.
Exactly. And the consequence is going to be different depending on the situation, depending on the student. I have some students that I will give a different consequence to because I know that they handle it different.
Mhm.
And the more you work with your students, the more you'll figure that out.
We've had many composers on this podcast, including three that are exclusive composers to Excelsior Music: Laura Estes, Carol Britton Chambers, and Tyler R. Carey. Excelsior Music is now a proud sponsor of the Growing Band Director podcast. As a composer led publisher, Excelsior Music publishes music that is for all levels for concert band, jazz ensemble, solo and ensemble, plus method books and resources. They're known for publishing inspiring, accessible music by composers who are sensitive to and passionate about the educational aspirations of your young musicians. Find your perfect back to school music at excelsiamusic.com. That's EXCELCIA music.com. So you mentioned as the outdoors being a draw to going to Alaska. And one of the things we wanted to talk about here was work-life balance. So is that something that you kind of had to find your way in finding a good work-life balance for yourself? It's obviously probably still an ongoing thing that we all struggle with. So has that been sort of a big part of your balance finding, if you will?
See, we should get my wife in here to talk about this because she would definitely say that I have a problem with at least I've had a problem in the past. Excuse me. Um, with work-life balance. I'm still working on it. I'm a people pleaser, so my default response is usually yes.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody asks me to do something, I'm like, let me see if if there's room in my schedule. Like in other words, if that block of time is in my day and it's open, that I feel kind of obligated to say yes. Um, and so yes, that's been a problem in the past. I also tend to be pretty active. I'm one of those if a body in motion stays in motion, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm always doing something. And if I'm not doing something, I get bored quickly. So if there are hours in the day, I usually like to fill them with something.
So being a middle school band director seems right up your alley.
Absolutely. And when I'm not doing that, I'm coaching CrossFit before or after school, or I'm doing CrossFit before or after school, or I'm going for a hike, or I'm going for a run. And in on top of that, I've got two boys that take a lot of attention. I try to spend a lot of time with them. So there's always something to do.
100%. And so let's just talk about the fitness thing here for a little bit, because this is something I think that's crept back into the band world since maybe 2020. For a long time, it was just like we kind of never talked about it. It just was what it was. And one of the things I try to tell people who are student teaching with me or who are younger and who are willing to listen is like, find the fitness that you will do. Because obviously, if you can't be your best self on the podium, that you're not going to be your best teacher for your students. So I mean, CrossFit is a very, I guess I'll use the word extreme, right? That's a very intense type of workout. I could be mistaken there. I've known some CrossFitters and done some of it. For some people, that CrossFit might not be for them. I was always told the most important workout that's for you is the one you'll actually do.
Bingo. That's absolutely it. CrossFit can be extreme if you want to. It's just like with anything else. You can take it. You can with runners, you can go out for a 1 mile jog, or you can say I'm training for a
Mm.
marathon, and it's everything in between. But it's exactly that. It's find something that you can do consistently. I'm not a big fan of like the 30 day 30 days to a six pack, or the 75-day hard thing or anything like that, because that's not a sustainable long-term thing. It's can you how many it, can you go for a walk, couple-mile walk 3 times a week? Great. One thing I love about CrossFit or any sort of like fitness class at all is if I've got a 4:30 CrossFit class, then I know I have to be out the door. My school is 15 minutes away from my gym, so I know I have to be out the door by 4:15. That makes me leave work. So having something scheduled outside of the day after my day, it serves two purposes. It gets me keeping in shape, and it also keeps me from staying at school until all hours of the night.
There's also a lot of correlation between the work it takes to become a great tuba player or a trumpet player, or how we try to teach our students, and hopefully what we tried to do when we were younger. In that consistent practice will make you better. Now, yes, the better you practice, the better you're going to be, but it's hard to spend thousands of hours on the horn and not improve. And the same thing with fitness. Even if you're not the perfect, example of someone who works out, if you're consistent through many years, you will be in shape more than better than not.
What do we always say? Trust the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are so many, since I coach CrossFit, and I also coach cross country running at my school. There are so many correlations between teaching band and coaching CrossFit and coaching cross country. That's all a learning process. I mean, if you trust the process, if you do it over and over again, you will see results. You may not make it to the Olympics as a runner. You may not make it to the CrossFit Games as an athlete. You may not make it into the Marine Band as a tuba player, but you will get better. And that's what 99.9% of us want to do.
And those of us who are marching band directors, sometimes if you're doing push-ups, it's nice to get down with the kids and show them you can do a little bit too. You earn some of that respect, especially those high school boys.
Absolutely. Man, the middle school boys always want to know how much I bench. it's it's kind of insane. And actually, that's the one secret of CrossFit. We don't actually do much benching, so I don't really have a
Mm-hmm.
good answer for them. But I can tell them I can deadlift more than twice their body weight. So
Yeah.
they're pretty impressed with that.
Did they know what deadlift was?
Yeah, most
Okay.
of them do. Most of them, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, you're right. Like any type of exercise is important. But again, there's even more and more about band directors who lift weights. Like everything that weightlifting does for your body also will help you be a better band director.
Absolutely. And I mean, and yes, at some point, I think the biggest thing about exercise is at some point you're going to get injured.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just the longer you do it, you're gonna probably hurt yourself. If you're trying to push yourself a little bit every time, you're gonna get injured at some point, and that might set you back for a little while. But as long as you take care of yourself, and you keep on coming back, and keep on working with it after that injury, just don't let an injury or something like that sidelining you and say, well, I used to go running, but then I got tendonitis and I just stopped running, and I haven't picked it back up again. Just getting back into it when you can is a big thing.
Yeah, if you're just making a point to be fit the best that you can and keep improving, it's a lifelong choice. It's not a choice,
Exactly.
like you said, for the next 30 days. It's something until the day you leave this earth, you want to continue to try to be as active as you can.
And with teaching being such a stressful occupation, I mean, working out of any type is massively helpful for mental health, about burning off that steam, burning off that aggression. Again, another reason to have some sort of fitness after school is you can just let it all go as soon as you walk out the door from school, you go to your class, you run, you lift, you jump, you do taekwondo or something like that, and you just let all that stress out. It just helps you be a better person for yourself and for your family that evening, for the next day. You're not just It's not just building on you every day.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that a lot of people will swear by working out in the morning, and they'll try to push you to do that. Or some people swear by working out in the afternoon or evening, and they'll try to push you to do that. I think sometimes we kind of have one that works better for us. Like
Mhm.
when we were at home more during COVID, I was always a 5:30 a.m. kind of thing. But then it got to a point where it was kind of hard to do it in the morning because of my morning routine and my kids and all that. So I guess I would say don't feel bad about wanting to work out when it's best for you and your schedule. Just make a time to do it.
That's the biggest thing, making time to do it. I've been the 5 a.m. working out person. I've been the 5 a.m. coach. Uh, I have to say that 5 a.m. is not a time I really ever want to see voluntarily ever again. But whatever works for your schedule, just making sure on top of that, making sure you're getting enough sleep too, because if because any schedule will work for you as long as you are making time to let your body rest.
And if anybody's finding our fitness conversation fascinating from two band directors, check out episode number 122. I was with Dan Austin, where we talked about Canadian band repertoire and band director fitness. So we're going to make a seamless transition, Philip, from band director fitness and CrossFit to Make Music Cloud. Now, I don't know how that's seamless, but that's what we're going to do. So you're a big proponent of Make Music Cloud, and a lot of people have known that in the past as smart music. First, like, can you tell us a little bit about how that transition happened from smart music to what's now known as Make Music Cloud?
Sure. And I will also say that I am now a big proponent of Make Music Cloud, and I used to be a big opponent of smart music. So I've kind of gone both sides of that. Back in 2005 or six, I started teaching in 2005. I can't remember if I started using smart music right away, but I started using it pretty quickly after that. Smart Music was a software-based program. You had to buy like a DVD or CD. I guess it was a CD at the time. I feel old. You had to buy a CD with the software on it and install it on a computer. And it was expensive, but it wasn't too expensive. And you had the little microphone that you'd clip onto the bell of the instrument, and the student would play. And so I had it set up in a couple practice rooms in my band room, and it worked pretty well. And we used it. I used it for playing assignments every now and then. It wasn't a regular thing. At some point, Smart Music went to a web-based program, which is what they are now. But the first couple of years of it being web-based were just horrifically bad. It was very clunky. There wasn't much in the way of repertoire available, and it also was incredibly expensive per student. I want to say it was prohibitively expensive. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it got to the point where me and my Title I program couldn't use it anymore. So we still just stopped using it. I ended up going to use Google Classroom for a couple of years, which worked out okay, but it doesn't have the same feedback options that Smart Music had. So, and 2020 happened, and we all know what happened in 2020. And So the Anchorage School District made Smart Music available to all of its teachers. The Anchorage School District would actually pay for student subscriptions for all of its students and educator subscriptions for all of its teachers. And so I would say that uh, Smart Music is actually the reason why my program survived during COVID.
Mm.
We were completely at home. We were completely remote for um, the rest of the 2019-2020 school year from March on, and then 2020 to 2021. So all of fall 2020 and into spring of 2021, we were remote. We got back the fourth quarter of 2021. Um, and so most of that time, we were doing classes online, and I would do like I would do a group class for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then I'd send everybody into individual practice rooms where they would work on their smart music assignments. And I would drop in on them randomly, just kind of a, hey, I'm going to pop in, make sure you're practicing, sort of thing. And they had to have their microphone on, they had to have their screen on and show me they were practicing. And they use smart music to turn in all of their playing assignments, to practice and turn in all their playing assignments. And it wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we actually made progress that year. The students that were in the program actually got better, which I would not have imagined at the beginning of the year.
Mm.
So ever since then, the Anchorage School District has paid for our student subscriptions and our educator subscriptions, and so we're able to keep on using it.
So how is it now that you're kind of back in school normally and all that? How are you using it now with your students?
I use it very regularly. I use it probably more regularly than most of the other teachers in the district. Um, I use it, I have one assignment per every 2 to 3 weeks. Every class gets one assignment every 2 to 3 weeks. And they have about 10 to 14 days to complete it. And it's usually not very long. It's usually like an 8 to 12 measure excerpt, because anything longer than that is going to take me forever to grade.
Mm-hmm.
And any more assignments than that, and it'll take me forever to grade. So I've played around with the frequency of the assignments and the length of the assignments, but my sweet spot, at least for my personal planning time and all that, is about, yeah, every 2 to 3 weeks and about 8 to 12 measures long. And that gives me enough time to grade it and to give them timely feedback, so that they can actually get better at it.
I did want to
Um,
point out, I did want to point out for people that are kind of trying to figure all of this out with whatever grading assignments you give and all that, you hit on the fact that it had to be practical for you. That's so
yeah,
important. And I met with a teacher who uses it, and he said every Saturday morning with his cup of coffee. Well, he's single at home with no kids, so that's the time that he can get to it. For me, Saturday morning doesn't work because I'm hanging out with my kids. But finding something that's practical for you as the teacher to be able to do. And you're right, 8 measures tells you everything. I mean,
exactly.
you could do a lot of all state auditions in 8 measures. It tells you everything you need to hear about kids.
Right. And especially with middle school band music, there's usually only 8 to 12 measures in a piece that are going to be that spot. That's the make or break. It's the crux of the piece for each section. Anything more than that, and that piece is probably outside of the most middle school band students' range. My top band usually plays in the 2.5 to 3.5 range by the end of the year. And even with that, there might be 2 to 3 spots in some of those more challenging pieces that I could do a playing assignment on. But usually, whenever the students ask me what the next playing assignment is going to be on, I usually say, okay, find the spot in your music that you don't want me to have a playing assignment on,
That one.
and that's going to be it. I can almost guarantee you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And
Um,
I did want to mention too, like we talked about grade two and grade three as a middle school band director, like getting into grade three, that's amazing that you can get to there. A lot of high school band directors don't look at grade two music. And I want to give a plea to people that don't worry about the grade level. Find great music that you think will work for your kids. I mean, I once was working on a 1 and a 1.5, and the kids could play 4, but the grade level doesn't matter. Finding stuff that works for the kids. There's so much great music at the grade two level. Yeah, I just wanted to put that plug out there for people.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, you can never really tell with publishers will there's a wide variety of criteria for publishers to say this is a grade 2, this is a grade 3, this is a grade 1. And so I've found some really easy grade 3s, and I've found some really hard, like incredibly difficult grade 1.5s. And so just find what works for your kids. Find something that challenges each of your sections. As a tuba player, don't give me footballs all day, man. Don't give me whole notes and half notes. That kills. That is going to kill your low section. Find something that's really interesting for them. They don't have to have the melody all the time, but give them the melody in every piece at least.
I've heard a lot of band directors say that, finding melody for the younger low brass students, and working on music that is not notes and rhythms challenging all the time allows us to work on mastery, allows us to work on all the other musical elements that are not chasing notes and rhythms.
Exactly. And having all your groups working on chorales as quickly as possible. There's there's a big push these days I've seen for chorale parts written out, all four parts for each instrument, and I love that. I work out of the Bach and Before books for my top group,
Hmm.
and I've also got some chorales arranged with all four parts for uh, intermediate groups as well, just so that they can get used to playing different parts. Okay, who's got the most important part in measure five? Well, everybody can look at their score and say, oh, it's the tenor part. Well, why does the tenor part have the most important part? Well, they're the only ones moving. Everybody else is sitting on a whole note. Exactly. So bring that part out, and just having everybody learn how to play musically, not just play the notes on the page.
So, since we're talking about repertoire that has great music for the low parts, are there composers or pieces that you kind of go to right away that you know are going to fulfill that?
So this is going to come as no surprise to you probably, but Randall Standridge is probably the king of doing this. He I'm a stan, I guess, a standard stan, but I actually tend to program his music too much because I know that he will always have good parts for everybody and interesting parts for everybody. He's also gonna throw in stuff that only middle school band directors will appreciate for their students, like writing an F flat instead of an E natural. Uh, I'll have students ask, why do you write F flat? I'll say, so that we can have this conversation about that,
Hmm.
because you wouldn't otherwise know that F flat would exist in music unless he wrote that. So that's why we're having this conversation. But it does seem to be more of a movement in composition these days, which is one thing I love, to see more composers writing more interesting parts for all instruments, especially percussion. If you listen to music that was written 20, 30 years ago, versus music that's being written today, the percussion parts are vastly different. You'll
Mhm.
see 20, 30 years ago, you might see a snare drum part, a bass drum part, a cymbals part, and a bells part, and timpani maybe. And these days, that's bare minimum. You're going to see all those plus mount one, mount two, your auxiliaries, multiple auxiliary percussion parts, multiple instruments being covered by one person. That's the expectation these days, and that's for middle school. And so the percussionists are being more challenged, and so it's fantastic to see that happening.
Yeah, that kind of creates a hard dichotomy, right? Because we don't want to throw away music that was really good a few decades ago. So just finding music that works for your students. Sometimes for me, I have it set up in a way where my percussion class is separate with one of my bands, my younger band. So I'm able to do stuff that I know isn't going to use a lot of percussion because I have them in a different class. But when I see them all together, like I love Frank Kelly's music, but I'm going to wait until I have four players kind of in that group, and that's what I'm going to do some of that music, and just being judicious about it, or writing parts. If there's a piece you really want to do, finding something that's musical to write for more kids to be there is important. And the percussionists will act much better in your rehearsal. They won't be hitting themselves with wet mops in the back. That's in high school. I can't even imagine what it is in middle school.
Uh, Percussionists if you're doing it right, your percussionists are probably some of your smartest, most able musicians in your room. And so giving them the least parts and giving them the least things to do is it's like asking your really, really smart puppy to just sit there and be good. Um, I'm not sure if I can get away with calling percussionists puppies, but I really love dogs. So
It's a good analogy.
so
Yeah.
that um no, I actually passed out air for band for my advanced band this year, and I love that piece. I love that piece, but we couldn't play it because I had seven percussionists, and it calls for, I think, maybe three.
Hmm.
And even we did do hymn song for Philip Bliss this year, or hymn song of Philip Bliss, and I gave the oboe parts to my other percussionists who weren't covering the written parts, and they played them beautifully on marimba and on xylophone and on vibes, and they did a fantastic job with it. I was really proud of them and how they did that. But yeah, you've got to have a plan for your percussions. You can't just expect them to sit there and be good.
I
They
also
will
I also
to a
love
certain
more
extent.
and more and more the vibraphone sound with the winds. It blends so well, especially on a piece like that.
Hmm.
So we kind of talked about make music cloud a little bit. Let's kind of go back to in that direction if we can. Can we talk a little bit about how you actually set that up for your students?
Absolutely. So like I said, ASD pays for our subscriptions, which is really nice. They're not cheap, but they're definitely worth it. You can pay for it out of fundraising if your boosters or whatever can afford it. Luckily, we don't have to make that cost for ours right now. I set up all of my students' accounts. I do know other teachers who have their own students set up their own accounts. I don't do that because, quite honestly, it's just easier and less hassle for me to set them up myself. I have them use the same format, so everybody's username is their last name dot first name, and their password is their student ID number and the word band. It used to just be the student ID number, but then but the password security, you have to add like a word or something like
Hmm.
that. I send out an email to parents to let them to make sure that they know that I'm doing this. I also use my email as the backup email, the recovery email, in case somebody forgets their password. But if somebody forgets their password, then I just say, "What's your student ID number?" And they usually know it. And then okay, add the word band, and they can usually get in. It's the first couple times are usually the first couple assignments are usually the roughest, and then after that, people figure it out. My first assignment for them is to log in, take a screenshot of their homepage, and then upload that to Canvas, just to prove that they can log in. That's it. And then their first actual smart music assignment or make music assignment. I go back and forth between calling it smart music and make music because to me they're the same thing. But their first actual make music assignment is a super easy playing assignment, like whole notes, half notes, just to make sure that they know how to use the controls, the record versus the play versus the there's it's there's a lot of different buttons that they can mess around with. I just want to make sure that they know how to use them. I will demo all of that on the screen in class. I will demonstrate all the different ways to mess up doing it. Um, I will mess up on purpose and have the students tell me what I did wrong. I loved that. I do that. I do that not just for make music, but for playing. I'll play an excerpt and say, all right, tell me what I did wrong. And so I kind of have them teach me how to do it. And so by the time they actually have to do one on their own, it should be pretty straightforward. It never is because middle school,
Hmm.
but it should be pretty straightforward. I also send home a cheat sheet, like a troubleshooting tips on. I send that home to parent emails. I post that on whatever file format we have.
Does it still track
So
when they're practicing? Does it still track how many minutes they spent working on an assignment?
it does, and they don't realize that at first.
Yeah.
And so I'll have students say, "Mr. Walters, I spent 4 hours practicing this." And I was like, "Well, according to Smart Music, you spent 3 minutes practicing that.
Yeah.
So maybe it was somewhere in between. It's not 100% accurate because it only tracks how many times, like how much time you're spending from pushing the button to turning it off. But it's definitely if somebody's saying that they spent hours and hours practicing on smart music and you see that they've spent 2 minutes, then there's a disconnect there somewhere.
So you talked about the fact that you do an assignment every few weeks and that it's a short assignment and all that, and it's usually from your band music. How do you integrate it into your classroom beyond that?
So like I said, yeah, every 2 to 3 weeks, the playing assignments are usually worth about a third of a concert grade, so they're significant. If a student misses multiple playing assignments, they're probably not going to get an A in band. So um, I don't really require practicing beyond the make music assignments because usually if I'm doing it right, the make music assignments will be the practicing that I need them to do to get
Hmm.
better. Um, if a student so make music will actually give you a 90 or will give you an accuracy rating like you got a 98% because you missed this one note or you were just a little bit early on this one note, or you got a 65% because here's all the different things you missed, and it'll color code everything. Like green is right on, yellow is early or late, red is just the wrong note, and you can click on it and figure out what the fingerings are. So I tell students that they can't turn it into me unless they hit 90%. So 90% is the floor for them to turn it in. And then I'll listen to every playing assignment because I don't trust Make Music enough to do the grading for me. So I will tell them to turn it at 90%, and then I will listen to it, and then I can reassign it if there's something significant that needs to be redone. Like if Make Music didn't pick up on a wrong rhythm or a wrong note, or if they're, let's say they're supposed to be slurring everything and they're tonguing everything, or they're supposed to be tonguing everything and they're slurring everything, woodwinds, then I can reassign it and give instructions saying, hey, try this again. Everything was great, but make sure you slur it or make sure you tongue it. There are teachers out there who will let Make Music do all the grading. It'll just be an automatic grade, and you can get more playing assignments done that way. But it's not surefire enough. It's not foolproof enough for me to trust it to do that.
You're also not
And plus,
listening. You're not listening to the students that way too.
exactly. This way I can guarantee students, their parents, and my administration that I know exactly how every student in my program plays, because I listen to them multiple times a year, each individual student multiple times a year, and I love it. I know the ability levels of each of my students, but from this.
Philip, what do you do when students don't turn in the assignment at all?
So I'm kind of lucky in the fact I've got an administration that will back me up on this. I give the students 10 to 14 days to complete that 8 to 12 measures. If they actually get on it the first day, it'll probably take them anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour. If they don't, and I'll remind them multiple days, pretty much every day from the time I assign it to the time it's due. So there's no mystery. After that, I'll usually email home saying, hey, so and so is missing this assignment. Um, and then after that, if they still haven't turned it in, probably that usually gets probably all but 10%. And after that, if they haven't turned it in, then I will give them a lunch detention. They have 15 minutes to eat their lunch, and then they got to spend the other 15 minutes down in the band room in a practice room working on that assignment. And then they have to turn in something by the end of it. They can't just not turn it in.
Hmm.
They can't leave the room without submitting something, even if it's not great.
I love that you hold them responsible for how they play. So many people
Yeah.
don't do that. I think it's really important.
Well, and it usually takes a couple assignments to actually get that through to them that this is going to happen every time. And then a lot of the students will just go ahead and turn it in on time because they don't want to get the lunch attention.
Yeah. Is it recess time? I mean, are they missing out on kickball too? Or
Sort of. We have if the weather's nice, students can go outside and walk the track or just be outside. And in Alaska, being outside is a big deal, especially in the fall and the spring when we have daylight and it's not cold.
yeah, I was actually going to ask that. I forgot to ask that question earlier. Being in Alaska, what is it like in the darkness?
So it's not dark all year long. It's actually pretty pleasant. In fact, right now is one of the best times to be in Alaska. In the fall, it gets kind of cold kind of quickly. I would say October and November are probably the least desirable months to be up here because it gets really cold, and in October especially, it's kind of rainy. It starts getting dark pretty early, like 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock. Um, and there's no snow on the ground. And so the snow actually, once it snows in like late November, early December, it actually feels lighter because you get the moonlight and the stars
Hmm.
reflecting off the snow. It actually makes everything feel better. So the this is for your listeners. The secret to being in Alaska is that March is the best time to be up here. It doesn't seem like it would be, but March is amazing because we get all sorts of sunlight. We get more sunlight than March in the lower 48. There's still snow on the ground. You can still get outside, but you can go skiing in short sleeve shirt and shorts if you want to
Hmm.
by late March because it's really warm outside. It's really pleasant. So if you ever want to come up to Alaska and avoid the summer rush, March is a good time to do it. April is kind of gross. April April everything melts and everything smells like decaying dog poop probably. But March is pretty nice, and then June and July are pretty great too.
So as we kind of close out a little bit, as a trained tuba player, what's something you might tell band directors to help with their tuba sections?
First things first, don't put your slowest musicians on tuba. It's kind of the same thing with don't put your slowest percussionists on bass drum, because your foundational instruments, your tubas, your bass clarinets, they can make or break your band. The best bands I've ever had have been when I've had some of my smartest, most brilliant musicians on my low winds, my tuba, my bass clarinet, my bari sax. They can really drive the group. They can give you the energy. Um, and I wouldn't say that size is going to be a factor at all for tuba. I've had fantastic tuba players who are tiny. I've had kind of mediocre tuba players who are huge. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'5", 230 pounds. So I'm your typical tuba player, but it doesn't have to be.
Hmm.
I've played with all state tuba players who were half my size, and they were wonderful.
What's something you're looking forward to this coming school year?
So the thing that I'm most looking forward to is that we are actually commissioning Brian Balmages to come up to Alaska in April, and he's writing a piece for my band program, and he's going to come up and conduct the premiere concert in April. It's actually the premiere concert's actually going to be on my birthday, which I'm really
Hmm.
excited about.
Are
So
you able to
I'm
tell
looking.
us about what the piece is about? Is that settled or
We don't really know yet.
okay?
Brian has not started working on it. I think he's going to work on it this fall, and he's planning on having the parts to us by January.
Okay.
So we were in talks last spring about it, and all we know that is the general idea of it. I think it's going to be about a grade 2.5 piece. And once I know my instrumentation better for this year, I'll give him more of an idea of what we're going to be what we're going to have there. We're actually combining this commission with my good friend Travis Harrington, who's the band director at Mirror Lake Middle School in Eagle River, or actually in Chugiak, just down the road from me. So my school is in Eagle River and his school is in Chugiak, and together he and I actually conduct the Chugiak Eagle River Community Band. So we're good friends, and this is a kind of a joint commission between the two of us. Um, and so our bands are going to our advanced bands from our middle schools are going to combine and do this premiere concert in April. So I'm really looking forward to working with Brian. He's a Maryland guy, so I'm looking forward to
Hmm.
that. And if you were to ask most band directors who are your top 5 band composers for middle school band, he's probably going to be in that list for a lot of them. So I'm looking forward to having him write a piece for us.
So every time I interview a composer, that's one of the things we talk about is that composers really want to know what your band program actually is. So when they write
Mhm.
a piece, it's going to work for your band. So I hear this from lots of composers. You know, I'm sure you're doing this with Brian Balmages and your piece. You know, don't just try to impress the composer that we have the best band ever. Try to be realistic with what your kids can do. So then in the end, you get a product that works for them, but more importantly, works for your students.
Exactly. Yeah, and I have a general idea of what my instrumentation is going to be like this year, where my strong sections are going to be. But again, I mean, people move. My school is a big military school. We probably more than half the school is fed by Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson, so it's a Army Air Force base. So I'll get these wonderful kids that come in and they play fantastically, and then they move to Guam in like October. So everything can change very quickly with us. It's a double-edged sword. Sometimes I'll get these kids that come in and play great and they move, but sometimes I'll have students that move in from Guam or Japan or wherever, and they're like an all-state oboe player or something. And so um, we just have to. I will see what band I have when I open my roster.
Wonderful. Philip, thanks so much for spending the time with us. Can we close with maybe some advice you might have for band directors?
So one thing I would definitely say is that some of your most valuable members in your band are not going to be your best musicians. Um, one of the most one of the most helpful people in my band this past year was pretty decent musician. They tried really hard. They worked really hard, but they weren't necessarily very gifted at what they did. But they were very willing to come in early and stick around late, help set up, help tear down, make posters for the concerts. Um, and they just you could tell they just love being in band. They love being a band kid. So don't necessarily the value of your band program is not in your best musicians, but just in your kids in general. Another thing I would say is that kids change very quickly. Don't make assumptions about the students that you've got, especially in middle school. They are they're awash in hormones, and they are trying new things on. They're trying on new personalities. They're trying on new terminology, some that makes us cringe. Um, and they're just trying to figure out who they are. And so every kid that you have is going to change one way or the other. They might go from being a good musician to being a great musician. They might be going up from a solid player to somebody who might not find that they like their instrument anymore. You might find somebody who comes in, they're just a total goofball, and then by the end of the time, they end up being one of your best students. You might find somebody that comes in who just loves band, and by the end of it, they just don't. And that one you're going to take personally every time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never not taken it personally when somebody dropped band, even if I knew it was the best thing for the student and for the band program. I always take it personally. But kids are gonna change, and especially in middle school. And so don't assume that the band that you have in front of you at the beginning of the year is going to be anywhere similar to the band that you have in front of you at the end of the year.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.